WTF just happened? Have you ever found yourself asking yourself that question? Well, today's guest has. In fact, she does that on a regular basis while diving into evidence of the afterlife and psychic mediums as an atheist. If you're one of those that questions the validity behind life after death claims being thrown around in our space all the time, then this is the show for you. Because once she started looking into all the evidence, as an atheist, mind you, she says that she was blown away. You don't want to miss this one. Welcome to the Skeptic Metaphysicians. My name is Will.
And I'm Karen.
And unlike Mulder and Scully,
we both want to believe.
So we've embarked on a journey of discovery.
We've talked to people deeply entrenched in the spiritual and metaphysical world.
We've thrown ourselves into weird and wonderful experiences. I even joined a coven of witches.
And wait, you joined a coven?
Yep, all in the interest of finding something.
Anything.
That will prove that there's something beyond this physical,
three-dimensional world we all live in.
This is the Skeptic Metaphysicians. Well, Liz Enton began examining evidence of an afterlife and anything paranormal in 2015 following the passing of her father. Well, while she was still considers herself skeptical and an atheist, the evidence that she found just blew her away. She's the author of WTF Just Happened, a sciencey skeptic exploration of grief, healing, and evidence of an afterlife, and the host of the podcast of the same name, all about the afterlife. No woo on that show, folks, just plain talk, which you know I love. Obviously, you've noticed that I am without Karen today. Sadly, she had a family obligation to attend to, so it's just me, but I am super well accompanied by Elizabeth Enton. Elizabeth, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to talk with you today.
Me too, because what you talk about is right up my alley. First and foremost, I know that you say that you are an atheist, right? So let's set the table. By atheist, you mean you don't believe in anything, or can you quantify that for me?
Sure. I guess when I say atheist, I think of atheist as believing in God and religion. And I've never seen any evidence of God. And I don't think God has anything to do with an afterlife. I think the two are completely separate. And I think the alignment that so many people have, to me, I respect it. But from a factual perspective, it doesn't make any sense.
I'm really curious to hear how you put the two together, because like this space that we're in, the spiritual world that we're both in, it's really tied, talks a lot about the afterlife, but it talks a lot about God or the universe or energies or whatever it is. So you don't think there's correct me if I'm wrong, you don't think that there's a white guy in a robe sitting on a throne in heaven, right? So
I would find that probably the least likely explanation of everything that could happen. Yeah, Am I going to say factually? But to me, I can't think of anything less likely.
All right. So then what, and I'm sorry, we're deviating a little bit, but then what is your thought? Like what is God for you, if anything?
Nothing. I mean, I have researched a lot of the studies done on afterlife, survival of consciousness, non-local consciousness. And I just don't see how I think it's more of a physics-based answer that in some form that we don't know yet, similar probably to how the cloud works, ideally something along the lines of the Large Hadron Collider, significantly more advanced, will be able to figure out what the substance is, but that our consciousness is not created by brain, but downloaded by a brain and continues in some form that is much more answered by particle physics than some singular moral consciousness that somewhat resembles a human that, according to religion, has questionable morals anyway, and that created all this. It just seems just irrelevant to the topic. And there's just a ton of data that our consciousness is non-local and downloaded. And to me, that question has nothing to do with, is there one singular huge consciousness that created it? So it's just...
Okay, so really, I didn't mean to make this into a conversation about religion or anything like that, or the meaning of God, but the question has to be asked. Do you then, some people believe that maybe we are all parts of God, right? I don't want to hesitate to use that word in your presence, and when we die, when we pass on, we reconnect, we become one once again. So then my question would be, first, two questions. One, is that your thought process? And if so, then what is it that we join up with?
Okay, so first, no, my thought process is not that at all.
Okay.
It was just, I'd go into my original thought that even got me down this path, obviously, aside from grief, was at this point, I thought consciousness was created by our brain neurons. And this will lead into answering your question.
No worries.
So if that happened once to create a me or to create my dad, why could it not happen again? Not necessarily me again, not related to karma, but just another set of brain neurons coincidentally creating another human, and it would get to be something I would experience, not as Liz, but just being somebody else, as if you guys have the experience of being another person. And to me, the only other thought I thought was possible at that point was complete obliteration. So even though I wouldn't have any memories of my life, it was better than never having an experience of consciousness again. Part two of my thought was, is there any possibility in any way, shape, or form that some of the memories have carried over? So I Googled that. I found researchers at the University of Virginia, Dr. Jim Tucker, and his mentor, who's since passed away, Dr. Ian Stevenson, factually studying cases of kids with past life memories and getting accurate results after matching up with data. So my whole approach afterwards, I found Winbridge with Dr. Julie Beischel, more researchers at the University of Virginia, such as Dr. Bruce Grayson, who studied near-death experiences, and Dr. Ed Kelly and Dr. Emily Kelly, who also studies mediumship, and significantly others. So I just came from it, not is there a God, but is there any data that shows that in some way, shape, or form, we can get information, mediums can get information that's factual and accurate that they could not know by normal means, such as Googling, cold reading? And if so, if all of this is happening from accurate medium readings, cases of kids with past life memories that check out, near-death experiences, this stuff and occurrences and results are absolutely not explicable if our consciousness is created by brain neurons. And when we die, that's it. So what answers does that leave? And this data there's no answer in the explanation of consciousness created by a brain that could explain for this. I sincerely hope it's survival of consciousness. I think that's the most likely explanation. And where is it we go? I don't know. I wish I knew. Mediums will say it's just this place of complete love. I don't like the word belief, because none of this is based on belief. It's based on actual data and some personal experiences I've had, such as getting medium readings, as well as some other weird things. But
we'll talk about all those, but go ahead.
Oh, yeah. This is just pure data. So I don't like to have belief in anything. I'm sure I'm human. We all have beliefs. It's impossible to say I don't carry beliefs, but I try not to. And so where do we go? So maybe this is my coming in with a little bit of belief. Mediums say that when we pass away, it's all love, and then we come here to learn. I have a hard time believing that in this other dimension, it's all perfect, pure love with the conflict we have here. So I'm guessing they might experience it that way, if I could guess. And again, this isn't data. This is now, I am going a little into the belief realm, but my guess is they experience that, or people experience near-death experiences as all love because, like, let's say you've been traveling for a month and haven't talked to your parents or your spouse, and you reach them, you're able to call them, and you're like, oh my God, I love you so much. You're not arguing over stupid things or irritated with each other. Or you come back from I'm thinking about like the first time you go to college and you come home and see your parents, like that first day, and I'm sure there are exceptions, but overall, that first day, you just feel so like the warmth and love. So near-death experiences is the very first moment of crossing over. So that's my guess.
I can totally see and hear the scientist skeptic still hiding under your words. And yet you're trying to, in your mind, make things make sense from a pragmatic point of view. And I love that, because that's been me the entire time. Up until, this show has changed some things for me. Let's just put it that way. But what I find interesting is that there's a thought that there's no way that science can explain some of these things, because our scientific instruments stop just short of being able to measure into this other realm that we apparently go to once we pass over. So really, there's no way to truly know what's out there without actually experiencing it ourselves. And yet it seems that a lot of us who are pragmatic in mindset and scientific and skeptical, we tend to try to still wrap it around some form of scientific explanation for something that may or may not have a scientific basis. To talk specifically about your love comment, that makes perfect sense, right? As you come back from a long trip and also you see your family for the first time and, oh my God, you're reminded of how much you miss them and how much you love them. And then maybe that passes, maybe it doesn't. Most of the time it passes a little bit, right? The intensity is not as strong. But then there's another school of thought that says that we are love. That is our true nature. We are love. So when we pass over, we're actually becoming who we truly are, which is love. At which point then might we experience complete love with abandon while we're out there?
I would think it would get boring. I do think in one sense, and again, this is more getting into philosophy than evidence, I do think we are in essence love in the sense that's when we thrive. But I don't think, I mean, we just can't say that's all there is to us. It seems like too much wishful thinking because of how there are people who are really cruel people. We can't deny that. There's conflict. So where does that come from? I think it would just be going against facts to say there's only love. Is that the ideal? Is that maybe what our goal is to strive towards? Yes. And I mean, I hope we just cross over and there's only love, but maybe it's like 30 dimensions down the line, because otherwise I don't think like a Hitler or, I mean, I'll leave politics out of it, but,
Yeah, good idea.
People, would be here. So, Hitler, serial killers.
Right. I understand what you're saying. And I think we could debate this for a long time because I love it. And I love playing devil's advocate. Very quickly, though, I will say that could it not be that when we are in that other plane, we are perfection, right? We are love. We are goodness incarnate. It's the act of coming into the three-dimensional space where we forget our divinity that then we become human and have the foibles that come along with being human from the get. There's a school of thought that says that we are perfect, but when we come here and become human, that's when our foibles take over, our emotions, our greed, right? There's no doubt, especially in this country, that greed is a runaway problem right now. And I think greed is the cause of a lot of our challenges and our problems. And I think that's because of the human condition, when we all just want more and more and more, right? That competitive edge we've had since we were cavemen.
Right. I mean, I sincerely hope we just all cross over and it's pure love. But I think from what we know with near-death experiences, and I think this would make the most sense, is that you go through the life review where you're really accountable. My thought that and again, philosophy, not evidence, aside from the life review, my thought that we're all just so advanced and then come here. It's kind of like, well, why come here? Maybe this is the step working towards that, but pure love. I mean, who wouldn't want that to be true? I mean, I will be really happy if that's the case.
Right.
But my guess is maybe we're much more advanced than what we are here, and it's the next step. But I still do think there's some form of progress. I mean, you look at a 2-year-old and they have a fight and they're screaming at each other, and like someone takes the 2-year-old's toy and they throw like sand in the sandbox in the other's face. And to them, grown-ups, and again, I'm sure there's exceptions of really horrible traumatic homes, but overall grown-ups look like they don't have problems because you never see adults act that way. Mm-hmm. But then there's this whole other slew of problems. And when you look back at being 2, you're like, oh my God, I can't believe I was upset that my friend wanted to play with my teddy bear for 2 minutes and my parents made me give it to them for 5 minutes to learn to share. And that was the worst thing that ever happened. Right. And you just have such a perspective. But then we have a whole other slew of problems that a 2-year-old wouldn't necessarily understand. And we deal with them in a way a 2-year-old wouldn't observe. And if I could guess, it's something like that as you progress. But I also think if you just are that and you come here, why come here? Although I definitely don't think it's like, I think evil is more complex than just evil, but I do think there are evil energies probably I don't know, but I have a hard time believing it's just love and then only just human that makes some things horrible. I think we have to look at the facts that there is a lot of horrible and a lot of good, and both are true. And what is the source? We don't know yet, but I do think we have an innate drive to move towards love and good. I mean, feeling anger and hatred, and it's a horrible feeling. We don't, but I mean, this is such a complicated philosophy. This is all just kind of playing with ideas. I can't say
absolutely.
I know any of this.
And that's really what we're doing here, right? I love the debate, over dinner, over coffee, over a drink, trying to be devil's advocate and trying to look at it in a philosophical point of view from different perspectives. This is all great. But I do want to talk specifically about you and how you got into this space, because the death of a loved one is always incredibly traumatic, and some people handle it in different ways. You ran in the direction of, is there life after death? Because I assume you wanted to make contact in some way, where others might have just, oh, well, he's gone and moved on to life. You dove into it in a very sincere way. So I want to hear about that before we move forward.
Yeah, there's two tiers, I think, to that. First, just the innate, shattering grief and just that moment of desperation. Actually, even before I thought of and found the research of Dr. Jim Tucker, my immediate thought was, is there a way to turn back time? Since I started reading about Einstein's theory of time relativity, and so much of science fiction has ended up coming true. Is there some scientific way to turn back time? And, one day in 5,000 years, someone will know to go back and get my dad at this day when medicine is significantly better. And so that was just the very first thought. I didn't necessarily think it was practical, but it was sort of the only place I knew to go to.
Sure.
And so from there, I was so fascinated by what I discovered about the relativity of time, and just our universe is all significantly different than we perceive. And then finding the research of Dr. Jim Tucker, and it became a combination of this desperation to see my dad again and not just think he was obliterated, facing my own mortality and other one's mortality, and just this mind-blown fascination. If you have never, ever thought something like an afterlife was possible, aside from, I guess, when I was very little, my parents told me some cute story of heaven, and I was a little older, and they're like, oh yeah, that was you can think of that like Santa Claus and the Easter Bunny pretty much, that was obviously what you tell a child about death. And just, it was both, if this was to be true, this was the most remarkable thing I could imagine in terms of happiness. It would be unfathomable, and it just, some existential dread would change. And scientifically, just the most fascinating thing. Think about when you're a child and you have, I guess, this fantasy of finding a hidden door to a whole new secret world. It's this is existing. This is the most amazing scientific breakthrough. The only thing that I could imagine equating that would be opening a door and walking into a room and seeing colors I'd never seen before, or finding out you can space travel to a new galaxy with different species, not even our solar system, a whole new galaxy. And just, it had that level of fascination, as well as, a realistic hope. I could see my dad and could continue living myself. So that was what just propelled me. And I can go more into what I learned and experienced if you'd like.
Yeah, no, we're definitely going to do that. Just to clarify, your dad passed away from medical complications?
Yes. Yeah, he had a stroke.
Gotcha. Yep. When you mentioned someone traveling back in time and getting the medicine he needed to make himself better, I wanted to clarify that. I assumed that the way that you researched whether there was life after death was by reaching out to psychic mediums and things like that to see if you can make contact. Were you able, let's just jump to the spoiler, were you able to make contact with your dad?
I'm pretty sure I did, yes. And
well, there you go.
Yeah, after doing the research, it took me reading multiple studies and books and up to quintuple blinded studies on mediumship and taking some classes at the Rhine Education Center and all this logical science and reading it before I was like, maybe this might sound crazy, but maybe I'll go get a medium reading. And go to some medium workshops. And my very first reading, she knew stuff she could not have known. And I hide my identity. I wasn't like, hi, I'm Elizabeth Enton. Here's my credit card. Here's my email and phone number. Like,
here's my birth date.
Yes, exactly. I'm like, you're getting none of that. And she was amazing. And I was like, what the fuck? Like, I just saw someone in front of my face defy the laws of the universe. It was like I had chills. She brought in my dad, my grandma, my cat. I was just like,
wow,
amazed. And I just remember leaving and turning to my mom, who I made come out with me, but she went into a different room. She wouldn't come in. She thinks this is all crazy. But I just turned to her and I was like, oh my God, I think this is real. And from there, I was just so amazed. I'm like, I have to see this again. So I started getting other medium readings, and it was across the board. Like, I had quite a few where I think they were very honest-hearted, but not very accurate. I had a couple that I was like, they are completely full of shit and they know it. And and then I had more that I was just like, they could not have known this. And it's so profound. It's just like, like getting to travel intergalactically, getting to jump into another dimension of string theory. It's just, I almost don't have the words for how profound it was. Yeah.
Now, have you had any experience with the organization that studies near-death experiences?
Oh, yeah. I've read a lot. I've gone to some of their Zoom talks, especially when we were all in quarantine. I think really highly of them.
Great. So, because there are a lot of scientifically minded people in that organization, which is great. Then you have the people who are just full on in the woo. And I find it really interesting to see the dynamic between that whole group when they're in the same room together. But how long did it take from the time that your father passed, when you started looking into this in earnest, to the moment you got your psychic medium reading that went and changed your whole world? How long was that you researched for?
Let's see. I got my first reading. She said I had to wait till my dad. Obviously, I didn't tell her it was my dad. So my person, I had to wait until they had been gone at least 6 months. That's what this specific woman said. And I was on another woman's wait list who has a really long wait list. So I ended up going to her workshops, but I hadn't gotten a reading with her. So this woman, I guess, let's see, it was maybe about 8 months after my research, after I started my research, that I got my first reading.
Okay. Yeah, it's interesting. 6 months. I hadn't heard that number. I think I heard 40 days it has to be. But I did hear it's consistent with you have to wait a certain amount of time because I guess the soul has to get acclimated or whatever it is.
Different mediums say different things. I have come to think it's just a personal choice of the mediums, and each one I'm sure has their own reasons for saying it. But I've heard of mediums have someone come in that day. And, I don't know. I'd have to respect and ask why each one says what they say, but there isn't a consistency in that. I have heard some say they will say that because they just, having someone that early in grief, they don't feel comfortable with. They feel the person needs to process. They feel it could be dangerous for them psychologically. Like, they're not therapists. They feel they don't want to take them on that early, but each one. So some of them it's ethics. Some of them maybe the way their vibrations work, they can't connect until 6 months. I don't specifically know for each of them, but they all have different reasons.
It's interesting to hear you talk because you are very pragmatic in lots of different ways. And you just talked about different vibrations that different people have that doesn't really fit into that box. So I'm fascinated. In the time between 2015 that your dad passed and now it's almost 10 years. Have you seen a progression of change in you as you go? Are you starting to lean more towards maybe some more woo material, or are you very much sticking to this is scientific and there's nothing that can change my mind?
I guess you can say I'm leaning more towards what people could call woo, but with a non-woo approach. I guess I'll go to things have happened that would be defined as woo, but I think in the end, everything's science. Science just explains the facts of how things work. So I think this happened. There's a quote actually by Dr. Ian Stevenson. I'm not saying it's true. I'm just saying it happened. So these things are happening, and I think when you get into woo, there's using somewhat of unrelatable words and an acceptance that of just belief, and you're not trying to get data. So I will say this happened. I don't know what to say about it, and this aspect verified it. This was just a weird thing that happened that wasn't verifiable. I would like to try to verify it more. And putting it all together using factual language, like an example, just quickly, let's say you take an out-of-body experience and someone goes out, and to me, the word vibration isn't so woo because it's literally a physical experience. And even string theory will talk. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So when I've tried to do out-of-body exercises, I will feel waves and what is literally vibrations. Like what would be used a vibration if you took you stood on a vibrating plate, which is one of the gym classes I go to, and I'll feel them a few feet above my body. I can't say I know why I'm doing that. So if you take a woo, for lack of a better word, approach, you'd say, I rose into the energetic field and I felt like the angels around me. And if you're to take a science-based approach, I say, I felt as if there were waves and vibrations, and if the nerves of my body, instead of ending at my skin, ended a few feet above. And that's just the facts. I'm not adding more to it. So what's the next step? The next step is to try to get better and see if I can go verify something. If it really is out of body, can I actually start to get senses and physiological senses like eyesight and smell? And some people have, and they report back then with facts that they were able to verify. So that is the next step. So I just try to report only the facts and not draw conclusions beyond what I can get from actual facts.
Sure. Makes perfect sense. So I got to ask the question, have you yourself been able to leave your body?
I don't know. So is that leaving my body when I feel sensations a few feet above? Maybe. I've had dreams of going to places that were then verified. But what is that? Is that leaving my body? Is that remote viewing? Which I guess out-of-body experiences, OBEs versus remote viewing, could be described as I come over to your place and I say, oh, you have that blue cup on your table, versus we're here on video, which would more be remote viewing. Oh, I see that blue cup on your table. We don't know enough how it works. Was I out of body? Was I remote viewing? Was I psychically reading somebody and then saw what they saw? I don't know. But some people will say they've gone out of body, and I will believe them when they have been able to verify it, where they felt they were out of body, they felt sensations, they visited somebody and or a place and came back with information about that person or place. And other people have even verified and said, oh, maybe they visit someone who's a medium and they'll say, oh, I saw you were out of body at this time, and something corroborates.
So then I've got to bring it back to something you said earlier. It's fascinating to think about it. Is it something that someone psychically or whatever, ESP wise, telepathy, receive that information from you and then you spit it out saying this, that, whatever? Could the psychic medium, instead of actual having contact with your dearly departed dad, gotten the information from you psychically, and that's what you heard?
That is one of the big questions. Dr. Julie Beischel, I have a few responses to this. First of all, there's actual studies done by Winbridge to test for just that. And for example, one of the ways they do highly blinded readings, where the sitter goes and takes down all the information. The sitter's the one who the medium's giving the information to. And the sitter doesn't actually know, I guess they're called a proxy sitter. They actually don't know who the reading is for. It's one of the experimenters out of, I don't know what pool, or volunteer experimenters. And so how could the medium be reading the mind of that sitter? So then, you can look at Winbridge for all the details, but essentially the person they're giving the information to does not know. Then there's another part where mediums have given me information I thought was wrong and said no, and clarified with somebody else. One of my friends who's a medium, this was early in our friendship, so she didn't know much about me. My uncle had recently passed. I purposely did not tell her that. And I'd always thought he was over 6 feet. He was under 6 feet and really angry about it. But I was never told that. I didn't even know, because I guess he was really angry when he was young and my parents were older parents. So like by the time he was old or middle age, when I was born, he wasn't talking about it anymore. But she kept saying, he's just under 6 feet. And I kept saying no. And it was true. And that's not the only bit of information. And this has come up repeatedly in research. Now, another part of this is mediums. I've got to trust them at this point, ones who've passed scientific studies, ones I know. I mean, I wouldn't go on this alone, but they say it feels completely different. They'll describe it in different ways. And now there's one medium who even says she sees psychic information on one. She like sees a screen and sees psychic information on the left and mediumship on the right. I might have reversed it, but she's also studied highly by scientists. She's had her brain scanned, and the brain activity in psychic versus medium shows up differently.
That's fascinating. That's amazing.
Absolutely insane, right?
Quick question. I do want to talk to you about the book and the podcast, but before we do that, a question jumps into my mind because you've had a lot of experience with psychic mediums. I know there's an organization out there that certifies mediums. We had him on the show to talk about his organization that he founded, which I think is fantastic. And they actually have a website where here are the mediums that are actually certified as, and they have to be 100%. They can't have a single thing wrong, incorrect.
Wrong. That's not true, actually. Yeah. So I'm very involved with Forever Family Foundation. Bob and his late wife, Fran Ginsburg, were my absolute mentors. Losing Fran was just the one of the hardest things.
So you knew Fran then?
I knew her very well.
Oh my God, that's amazing. Because when we met Bob, she had already passed.
Oh, yeah. Fran is like, I feel, she was probably one of the most important people in my life the past few years. So yes, I know Fran very, very well. And
so I was under the impression they had to be 100% accurate. That's not the case.
That is not the case. No medium is 100% accurate. They have to be significantly accurate beyond the odds of chance. So for example, let's say, I'll take a random person. Let's say they lost their grandmother, Sarah, so a medium might sit there and say an S name like Sarah, I'm getting a grandmother energy on your mother's side. She died at 70. She was a high school teacher, had 2 children, and she rode horses. And that's really significant. Let's say she was not a high school teacher and that was wrong. Let's say she did not ride horses, but the rest is really impressive. So that would still be a medium who passed.
Okay.
And
well, then I apologize to all those psychic mediums who I called a fraud in my mind when they were wrong with one thing. So sorry about that.
Right. But if they're getting most wrong, or if mediums are getting everything right, but it's general, like you have a 30-year-old sitting in front of you and you're like, you've had a lot of loss. Like you don't have any living great grandparents. Am I right? And, I see that your great grandmother, they sort of were in like that traditional role, and your great grandfather was too, like the male, female, and they had a lot of children. Like there's things that just can be very general, generation based. And some of those mediums might be frauds. They might be really genuine hearted and just get very general information and maybe just haven't pushed themselves to be evidential because maybe their clients haven't required it, or maybe they're just, things are popping. Like I've taken mediumship classes and I have sat with people and given them readings, and information is coming into my head that's really logical because I'm doing the assignment. I'm told to say what comes into my head, and I know it's coming logically, and I'm trying to be right to do the assignment because I'm there. And the person, depending who, some are either maybe they're very believy, or I'm in the class with them and they're trying to be respectful and they're like, no, you're good. You're getting everything right. I'm like, right. But of course I am, because there's just certain things any person can deduce.
Right. Sure.
So
then do you think that the only way to make sure you don't get swindled by a psychic medium who's just full of shit is to just not give them any information at all, to be a complete blank slate? Or are there other ways that you can make sure that doesn't happen to you?
I think it's a fine line. In the beginning, I was just like, give nothing. I think it's a fine line. I think take protocols, hide your identity as much as you can. And when you're sitting there, I mean, you have to let them lead a little bit, but you can afterwards be like, oh, you're like bullshit. But I think if they come in and the first thing they say it really becomes, it is a fine line, because I did it too much of like not say anything in the beginning. And scientific studies, like, again, if you read like the research studies, like Dr. Julie Beischel, you literally give nothing. But, you know, when you're getting a reading, it's a fine line, don't give them more than they ask for. If they're like, I'm getting like a T name, don't be like, oh my God, that's my brother. I can't believe he's here. And I miss him so much. We were twins. Don't do that. Say yes. And then if they ask for a little more, if they're like, oh, I'm just not getting like, I'm getting he's your generation, but not more than that. Then you can say, okay, he was my twin. Or if you're understanding something and they're not, and you can tell, like, let's say, I don't know, like okay, so I'm giving a little of my own evidence here, but okay. Like I got a few readings in the beginning where they're like, was your dad either hurt in a fire, or was he a fireman? Who's the fireman? Why am I hearing fire? Fire Island was really important in our family as a child. So maybe they're seeing a fire, because you are working with humans. So my dad would be like, fire, tell her Fire Island, fire. So they're just seeing fire, because Fire Island isn't any place they've ever heard of or been, let's say. So they're saying, so he's giving them, because it's not as good as speaking on the phone. It's just not. If it was, we wouldn't be questioning and studying. If there was an afterlife, we would know.
Right.
So if you just sit there and are so literal that you say no, then you're not going to get more. But if you say, in that situation, I would say, yeah, there's something, I'd be like, not exactly, but fire makes sense. Can you give me a little more? And if they're like, oh, I can't, can you give me some more? Then and then I'd say Fire Island is where I went in the summers. And maybe suddenly they're like, oh my God, yes, that's it. That feels right. And I believe they say that feels right because they're certified by Forever Family or Windbridge. And they got quite a bit of information. Like they got the letter of my dad. They don't always get the name. Sometimes they do. They got like aspects of his personality and hobbies and work. So I'm like, okay, I already trust them.
Right.
And so then if I say, yes, it was Fire Island, my reading's going to be that much better, because they're like, oh, that makes so much sense. Let's see if we can go further with that. And maybe they get a specific memory from that. I think if you're not doing what I'm doing, where it's really about research, and you go to a medium and they're not getting accurate information and they're trying to ask you a lot of questions, because I've experienced this and it's clear they're fishing, I will start to let them lead and go along with it, because it helps my research. If I really just wanted this reading for itself and I wasn't getting readings regularly and exploring, you have a right to say, don't wait like 40 minutes in, but after like 5 or 10 minutes, if everything you're saying is no, an ethical medium will say, and this has happened to me, I'm so sorry, I'm not getting the information that you need. I'm not connecting. We can end this now and I'll refund you. Or you can come back in like a month and we'll see if it's better. So it's all a balance. I think the way to prevent getting swindled, don't give your information up front. Don't make it Googleable. Then once you're there, it's refined, and just don't pour out. Just try to say yes, no, or maybe until there's a reason to say anything more than that. And then the other, this is just one of the things. I mean, some people might just be like, well, obviously, but nevertheless, people, when you're in grief or trauma, your brains don't work the same way. So it is absolutely not on you if this has happened to you in any way. But some mediums, which had happened to me, told me I had like bad energy around me. And she sold $300 candles that would cure it. Anyone who tries to upsell, do not. That doesn't mean if you're like, oh, I would love to try a psychic reading again, then, or another reading or something. Yeah, you're going to have to pay for another service, but they don't try to sell up any upsell.
Right. You have a curse on your family and I can lift it for $500. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So
I do want to talk to you about your book and your podcast. WTF Just Happened.
Yes.
Was the book first or was the podcast first? Which came first, chicken or the egg?
Book came way first. The podcast was, yes. The podcast was one of those, I'm lonely and alone in my room and isolated over quarantine. I want to talk to more people. Let me just try a podcast. It'll be fun. And then it was so much more fun than I expected. And I taught myself podcast editing. It was just ended up being an addition, but now something I would definitely want to stick with.
We've talked all this time about afterlife and psychic mediums. Is that what your show and your book is about, or does it dive a little bit more into other things?
So my book, another one's going to be coming out some point, and it's soon-ish. So my book, which I'll explain why I said that. So my book starts with from when my father first got really sick to about maybe like 2 to 3 years after, and all the research I had done and my experiences then. It doesn't start with mediums. It starts with like the research of Dr. Jim Tucker. And it starts with kind of how I'm like, oh my God, what the fuck? Like there actually seems to be some evidence, but there has to be a catch. And it starts with how I keep going further and further with this, and then start meeting the people. And then, so much has happened since the book ended. So much. Like this is just, when I first start meeting the people, and now I've gotten to know them really well and have participated with them in experiments and done so much more. And that's what I'm going to go into next. So this is just the whole journey, what the fuck just happened, of how I went from thinking there was zero chance of an afterlife to all these very logical reasons to why I completely changed my mind. And it's actually like light and funny and talks about like all the awkward things that happened along the way. Like just, yes. I mean, I met the mediums and tried to like see if they were cheating. And like one who's one of my best friends now, like thought I was like a journalist trying to expose him. And so just really silly things happened along the way. And Fran's a big part of the book too. So
that was in the book then. So then do you suggest you read the book first and then listen to the podcast? Or can you jump into the podcast now without having had to read the book?
You can jump into the podcast. So the podcast is a variety. It's psychic mediums. I have it's parapsychologists like Lloyd Arbach. It's a few people who've had personal experiences who verify it. It's near-death researchers. It's I have someone who's an animal communicator. Yeah, so just it's across the board. I even have the episode hasn't come out yet, but I'm going to have ones on out of body. I'm going to have ones on remote viewing. I'm going to have a skeptic who's like a professional skeptic who doesn't think any of this is true. And we just get into a really interesting conversation. And that's actually one of my favorite episodes. It's not ready yet, but it's just really interesting.
It sounds fascinating. I can't believe that the time has flown so fast. If someone wanted to listen to your show or reach out to you, we're going to add for sure those links in our show notes. But what's the best way for someone to reach you if they are so inclined?
You can go to my website, which is WTFJustHappened.net, because that links to everything. You can link to my email. You can link to Amazon, where you can buy my book. You can link to all the places that you can listen to my podcast. We're on all the usual places. You can find me on my social media, like Instagram and TikTok. A lot of people reach out to me on Instagram. You can email me, and all that's right on my website for you to find.
Perfect. That's awesome. This has been so much fun. We're definitely going to add those links. I'm going to connect with you offline because any friend of Bob's is a friend of mine for sure.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for coming along on this journey of discovery with us. We'd love to continue our conversation with you on our website at skepticmetaphysician.com or on Facebook and Instagram under Skeptic Metaphysician Podcast. If you know someone who would benefit from hearing the messages we're sharing on the show, do them and us a favor and share the show with them. It will help get the word out about us, and it may just change someone's life for the better. And if you're listening to this on the radio and you missed something, well, not to worry. All of our shows, including this one, can be found at skepticmetaphysician.com, where you can also watch the videos or even send us an email or voicemail directly from the site. We absolutely love feedback and would appreciate hearing from you. Well, I hope you've enjoyed this episode as much as we have. That's all for now. We'll see you on the next episode of The Skeptic Metaphysicians. Until then, take care.